دمتم مساء. أرحب بكم من جديد في أكاديمية المملكة المغربية، وذلك من أجل مواصلة هذه الحلقات العلمية. لي عظيم الشرف والسرور بأن أقدم في هذه الأمسية بالأكاديمية أستاذة مرموقة وباحثة معروفة في مجال التاريخ ودراسة الثقافات، وهي الأستاذة نادية البغدادي. أستاذة نادية البغدادي هي أستاذة التاريخ الإسلامي الحديث، وفي نفس الوقت اشتغلت بأحد المعاهد، بل كانت وراء تأسيس أحد المعاهد المهمة، وهو معهد الدراسات المتقدمة بجامعة أوروبا الوسطى، المسماة بالإنجليزية Institute for Advanced Study in Central European University. الأستاذة نادية البغدادي درست في الجامعة الحرة في برلين، ولكنها تنقلت عبر العديد من الجامعات الكبرى العربية والأمريكية. فهي بالطبع بعد اشتغالها في برلين انتقلت إلى تونس، واشتغلت في تونس لمدة، ثم بعد ذلك في القاهرة، وبعد ذلك في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. وبالطبع تنقلها هذا جعلها تشتغل في سياقات بحثية مختلفة، ولكن يمكن أن أقول بصفة مجملة حتى لا أطيل بأن هذه السياقات في الواقع تدور حول دراسة بمناهج مقارنة للأبحاث في كل من المجتمع والدين والثقافة. وهذه المناهج المقارنة سمحت بالفعل بأن تضع في أبحاثها بعين الاعتبار يعني مقارنة الجوانب الدينية بالجوانب العلمانية في دراسة التاريخ بشكل عام. إلى جانب ذلك فالأستاذة اشتغلت أيضا على تاريخ القرن التاسع عشر وعلى تاريخ الدولة العثمانية، وأيضا على كثير من الديانات التوحيدية بشكل عام. بالطبع يطول الحديث لو قمت بسرد بعض الأبحاث والدراسات التي قامت بها والمؤلفات التي عملت على نشرها وساعدت على نشرها، ولا أطيل وأترككم مع محاضرة للأستاذة على أساس أن يكون لنا موعد فيما بعد المحاضرة من أجل النقاش. فالأستاذة المحاضرة الأستاذة نادية البغدادي، التي أشكرها شكر جزيل باسم أمين السر الدائم لأكاديمية المملكة المغربية على قبولها تقديم هذا العرض، أنه بعد العرض الذي سيستغرق حوالي 30 إلى 40 دقيقة سوف يكون هناك نقاش. العرض سيكون باللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن الأستاذة الباحثة نادية البغدادي يعني تفهم اللغة العربية جيدا، وبالتالي يمكنكم بعد ذلك أن تطرحوا أسئلتكم بالإنجليزية أو بالعربية كما يحلو لكم، يعني كما تريدون. مرة أخرى أشكر الأستاذة الباحثة السيدة نادية البغدادي وأعطيها الكلمة مشكورة.
And thank you for letting me speak in English, which is much more comfortable for me than speaking in Arabic or French, as a matter of fact. So thank you again very much for this invitation. It is really a privilege to speak not only at the Academy, but also to speak to the new generation, to the doctoral students. And it is always something which we as the old professors do enjoy very much. Usually we learn as much from you as you will hopefully learn a little bit from me this afternoon. And I'm very much looking forward to our discussion after my presentation. So the topic of my presentation seems to fit very well. We discussed this before with what you are doing this week, what you did yesterday, what you do today, or what you did today, this morning with Dr. Aziz. I'm approaching this from a very different perspective for today. And I hope you will follow me through the discussion on the biographical turn in historical studies. You will have noticed that with TikTok, Instagram, and the related social media tools, we see today an hitherto absolutely unimaginable capacity to record life and to share life, something that we historians are very much dependent on. Record and share our life and the life of others. We have entered an age in which recording, documenting, and sharing life, again, one's own life and that of others, has changed fundamentally from all earlier forms and desires to write down life. The no longer so new social media provide a limitless and borderless medium, while pre-formatting, and that sounds familiar, as we will see, while pre-formatting the very genre of representation in terms of aesthetics, of volume, of permanency, and accessibility. So the theme of my talk today, then, the biographical turn in historical studies, addresses two issues. One only on the margins, being related to the medium itself, today the social media, before we had others. The other more categorically and related to the tension of approach and subject content, or more precisely, to methodology and object of study. In historiography and genre broadly conceived, biographical studies designated as such, or in a less explicit fashion, return in waves. So there have been always biographies, nothing new about this, and certainly not in the Arab world. Obviously, this has to do with the very subject of the talk, the fascination with the lives of others, caught in biography, lives of important, famous, exceptional men, and today also women, and lives of others as groups. At the same time, the genre of biography has been hailed as a genre that, like no other format or other genre or way of thinking, connects agency to context, to circumstances, and to condition. While finally it has been cast, that is biography, with suspicion in equal measures as it has been hailed, namely as a very suspect enterprise. It has been called dead and it resurfaced. You may thus ask, the biographical turn, is it really worthwhile to have a talk this afternoon about it? I think yes, otherwise I wouldn't give you this talk. What then, so is the guiding question of my talk, has been the effect of the biographical turn. Has the genre changed, or the object of analysis? Who is portrayed and how? The paradox we are dealing with is, while the biography portrays the subjectivity of an individual, it aims, at the same time, to provide insight into the time, the social or cultural circumstances and conditions that shape this very life, right? So it is this tension which is at the very foundation of biography. In order to whet your appetite, and before I continue with some reflections upon the topic, let me share with you a few more recent biographical approaches. The biographical turn occurred, as we've seen, in various areas and media. Let me start with a first one. This is, some of you, does anybody know the Retour à Reims, which is a celebrated book by the sociologist Didier Eribon, and now I need to see the, how do I click from here, the YouTube? Can you do this from the back?
YouTube.
Or can I do this from here by clicking on it? On the link, please. Sorry, I don't, no, I
Sur
can't.
le lien.
Oui, ça marche?
Il va, yes.
Oui, d'accord.
I will do it.
Sound.
Le son.
Le son. Je fais ici le son ou est-ce que vous pouvez, parce que c'est important de... Can you do this? I think it's simply muted. Ah, d'accord, we hear something. If you can do this again from the beginning, just briefly, it's only a very brief. D'accord.
You will repeat it.
Yes, wonderful.
C'était trop important.
Okay, from the beginning, please. It's just very brief. It's just 1 minute 30 seconds. But we would like to hear the beginning.
C'est vrai, c'est dingue ça. Il y a une haine de la démocratie de la part du gouvernement. Et après, ils s'étonnent que massivement les personnes ne participent pas à ce jeu-là. Puisqu'ils arrêtent.
L'homosexualité, le
Non,
milieu culturel,
il ne faut pas le faire de
beaucoup de
début.
choses ce qu'il dit sur la culture est magnifique et l'école de son point de vue est magnifique. Ça aussi, ça a disparu parce que son personnage a disparu.
Moi, j'ai rarement lu des histoires de...
Don't worry, I have only 3 YouTube,
Ça,
so
de mépriser.
if this works, then the other two will work
très
as
touchant
well.
dans la sincérité avec laquelle elle va chercher ses propres niveaux de déni, en fait.
Non,
Voilà, pardon, ça m'énerve.
well,
Se constituer comme sujet politique,
ça ne marche pas.
c'était s'en remettre à des porte-paroles par l'intermédiaire desquels la classe ouvrière existait en tant que groupe constitué, en tant que classe
No.
consciente
Okay,
d'elle-même.
so if it doesn't work, it's a pity, but
De prendre une voix qui corresponde à la voix de l'auteur. Et en passant ce texte en
You can
film,
go
on le
back,
déplace,
let
on
me-
ouvrait
can I-
encore
no,
de
I
nouveau,
can't
on allait mettre des
I'm now
nouvelles voix à
out.
l'intérieur, des nouveaux visages. Et d'une certaine manière, la
Just
voix
stop
pouvait
it.
accompagner ce mouvement-là. Ça veut dire d'aller
Look
encore
at
sur autre chose
YouTube.
que ce qui sera tendu et d'un coup,
Time
évidemment,
معروف. أيوة. So shall we try it again or shall I? 1 second, okay, because it's good to hear it. You want to hear this. So this is, I can say, as we are fixing it,
Qu'est-ce que vous faites? Vous nous parlez de démocratie. Mais
we should have tried this before, sorry, because normally it just works. You don't get it?
qu'est-ce que vous faites? Vous nous parlez de démocratie, mais qui c'est qui fait la démocratie ici? C'est vrai, c'est dingue ça. Il y a une haine de la
Ça ne
démocratie
marche
de la
pas?
part du gouvernement. Et
Non.
après, ils s'étonnent que massivement les personnes ne participent pas.
Il y en a
à
aussi
ce jeu-là.
après
Parce qu'ils
un
arrêtent pas de
autre,
mépriser, en
mais
fait.
si
Voilà,
ça ne...
ça m'énerve en fait.
Ah d'accord, on laisse comme ça. C'est seulement 1 minute. Mais ça, c'est important.
Par Dieu, c'est vrai qu'est-ce qu'il y a de salopard?
Mon grand-père me raconta un jour qu'alors qu'il circulait boulevard Saint-Germain à 7 h du matin pour se rendre à son travail, les bourgeois avinés, sortant d'une soirée ou d'une boîte de nuit, lui avaient crié « Salaud de pauvre !» Quand mon grand-père parlait de lutte des classes, cela avait un sens très concret pour lui.
dans les choix d'adaptation du livre, il y avait deux options évidentes qui étaient soit garder une grande spécificité du texte et son aspect très kaléidoscopique, éclaté, qui revient dans les temps, les personnages, etc. C'était trop important chacun de ces sujets pour à chaque fois les survoler. Et le temps, il fallait que je le garde. Ce qui était pour moi le plus important, c'était le retour à une histoire de la classe ouvrière et non pas celle du Tranche-Fuche, de temps de l'après. Et du coup, en enlevant le personnage du coup, de Didier Ribon, s'enlevait beaucoup de thèmes, donc le Tranche-Fuche, mais aussi l'homosexualité, le milieu culturel, enfin beaucoup de choses. Ce qu'il dit sur la culture est magnifique et l'école, de son point de vue, est magnifique. Ça aussi, ça a disparu parce que son personnage a disparu.
Moi, j'ai rarement lu des histoires de transfuge à la première
D'accord,
personne.
merci. On peut
Et
arrêter ici. Merci. Et je suis maintenant dans le PowerPoint. Oups, non? Voilà. Et on recommence ici sur cette fiche. D'accord. Et alors, so this novel then is a biography almost written like a novel. So it was a mistake to say a novel, but it's a biography that reads like a novel, and it is a biography of a city. It's a biography of a city that describes at the same time class, the working class, and the self, who is Didier Ribon, the very well-known sociologist. This is one example of a biography after the biographical turn that has been taken up as well, and I don't dare now using the YouTube or not, maybe we can try this, by a film that was just released now, and that moves very much from the individual of the author who wrote the the biography indeed to a portrait of class that is situated in the city. Maybe we can just, this is very brief, this is just a trailer, but it says a lot.
Je suis difficile, mais j'aime bien ce qu'il vaut, quoi.
Lorsque je lui parlais au téléphone, ma mère me demandait « Quand viens-tu nous voir ?» Ce fut le début d'une réconciliation avec elle. Elle me parla beaucoup de son enfance, de son adolescence, de son existence de femme mariée. Elle me parla de mon père aussi. Que pensait-il ? Oui, que pensait-il du monde dans lequel il vivait ?
D'accord, merci.
J'aime bien être dans le calme, j'aime bien être tout seul. Il y a le bruit à l'usine, il y a le bruit à la maison, il y a toujours du bruit.
Thank you. But I wanted to show you this in order to illustrate that what we are discussing here, we are historians, but as you know, historians have really embraced fully now the various medias, including film, documentary, and using documentary as a style. So what we are seeing here in brief summary is a question, and this is what biography is all about, and we know it from the ancient genre as much as from the new, is genealogy and escape from genealogy. Upon his return, Didier Eribon says, everything my father had been, which is to say everything I held against him, all the reason I had detested him, had been shaped by the violence of the social world. Right? And it is something extremely powerful. I don't know if you have ever read the book. If not, I warmly recommend it to do so because it is extremely instructive for all students, regardless what epoch you are studying. And he insists repeatedly, and this is where we have the paradox of today, and not only of today, but of the genre, the fact, he states, that his own escape from his milieu does not mean that it did not thoroughly determine the trajectories of most other people around him. So here we have the juxtaposition that we have the individual who is portrayed in the biography alongside a biography of a class in a city, which is also given the frame of the biography. And I think this is a wonderful example, very indicative of what we see, the exemplary versus or in connection with the individual. A very different approach, just to show you the broad range that the biography as the new means of writing history has encountered is, and I don't dare clicking on this YouTube, it's only 30 seconds. If we can dare doing this, it's very powerful. This is the opposite of what we've just seen. The musealization of a biography, the return of the hero. I don't need to tell you who that is, but let's just, this one. Just very quickly look at it. Merci. This is it, but this tells you already it's a very different approach. It is very much in line, if we go back to the slide, please. Very much in line with a tradition. Yes, that's the one. Can we have the full screen view? Okay, merci. So, this is, again, I'm just showing you some images of a portrait that is very different, but at the same time, different from what we've seen as a retour d'Arin, but an alternative hero here as well. He is the emir of the resistance, he's a holy fighter, founder of the Algerian state, precursor of the codification of modern humanitarian law. He is a warrior, he's a statesman, he is an apostle, he is so many things. And these epithets, and this is taken from the catalogue, they state, I think very poignantly, often impressive but also contradictory. So the epithets are all these descriptions I just read out to you, abound when it comes to evoking the emir, whom we all have heard of. But do we know enough about Abdelkader Muhyiddin? Has the man who inspired many French writers and so on and so forth really been properly introduced, right? So this is very much a classical approach to writing biography in the modern age. It's here, the typology that we see is about insight and example at once, which I think is very well captured in, I don't know if anybody has seen the catalogue of the museum. It's an exhibition that presents the emir, shedding light on him in its entirety, its entire life, going deep into his own itinerary, and at the same time, although he's so exceptional, portraying him as a man, as a life, as a model of example. And it is this tension which I believe constitutes the fascination with biography. I just picked out two more recent books that deal with Abdelkader. You have, again, the heroization of the emir. This is, you can read it for yourself, cette Biographie Originale, when it goes deep down into showing pénétrer la pensée de plus grande mystique arabe du siècle dernier. So it is really focused on retracing a big man, a great man, modern hagiography almost. And on the other side, a very different approach to a biography on the same person, based on more or less the same materials, but coming from a very different perspective, unveiling the other side of a life, the énigme de l'histoire, this is Thierry Zarcon, l'histoire secrète de l'emir, and which tries to show the multi-layeredness and complexity apart from that hidden side, and that also depicts a great man, it falls into this category, but also introduces indeed a complexity that the other biography would not so easily get away with, right? So it is one life, and this is for, of course, also for students like yours, when you think, oh my God, what can I still write on this topic? There is never an end to discover new facets, even if you have the same sources, right? It is the questions that you raise that define what you do. So very quickly, just a very different kind of biography, namely, and we have some empire Ottomanists and others here with us, empire seen through the life of a man. I just took this out because that had really been an important book, revisionist history, which seen through the eyes, through the life of a man, Stefanos Vogorides, shed indeed entire new light of networks, of the workings of an empire that is not only top-down, as we very often understood the Ottoman Empire to function, but precisely is defined from within through individual agents of change, as the book formulates us. Very briefly, my own thing, which I unfortunately can't put yet in a book cover, but hopefully soon. This is a very different story, almost a parallel story to Abdelkader. It's an intellectual history. It is somebody who is outside the center of power. What we've seen here before is somebody who is close to the center of power, but it's an individual that shapes state policy, right? That's the argument here of the book. This one here is, this is Ahmed Fares Ashidiak. I forgot, it seems to put the name there, who is somebody who followed almost the same itinerary as Abdelkader, the same stations, except for Lebanon, but yeah, Abdelkader ended in Damascus, as you know, but it is indeed around the Mediterranean, through France, England, and Istanbul, so the power, the centers of powers, but coming, as I call it, an eccentric life, somebody who is completely out of the circles of power, and yet had an enormous impact. But how does this work? It's only through biographical and biographical interpretation that you can show this. And the last one I'm going to show you, in order not to be too heavy on male heroes and examples, it's Zainab Al-Fawaz, but I'm not mentioning her only because she is a female Nahdawi, but also because she modernized in a radical fashion the old Arab genre of the dictionary. And she did this, you have the title here, Kitab al-Dur al-Mansur fi Tabaqat Rabat al-Khudur, where she actually put together 430 biographies of women whom she collected by asking people to send her examples of exemplary female women life, right? And this is in the late 19th century. So just to show you, when we speak of biography, we have an enormous richesse of ways of depicting life, and it depends on what you want to do with this biography that will tell you, or that shows how biography could work. So she turned, Zainab Fawaz, she turned the genre basically inside out. She put women who were a minority in all dictionaries so far, not only in the Arab Muslim world, but in all dictionaries that you would have of the time, and used the model in order to portray something different. In that sense, she has been really a precursor, because this is what we see today, but she did it much earlier. So as you see, biographies indeed move between context, structure, and the individual. And this holds true in various degrees, as I very briefly, just with this tour de force, showed you, for all biographies. This is what interests us. But now the question is biography a real scholarship? Right? In Western scholarship, the biographical turn, when it occurred in the 1980s, and in intervals it came again up in the 90s and until now, it actually has never ceased. There has always been biographical studies. It is relevant in historical, sociological, and cultural studies. Whatever we may want to say about biographical, the biography as a scholarly work, it has always been seen as moving between two positions. Biographies aim to offer a deep and, importantly, authentic insight into a person's life, and by extension, in her time, culture, and world. And on the other side, biographies are reduced to being actually non-scholarly precisely because it is doing this. It is pure fictitious. Between these two poles moves the discussion until today. I just took two positions. I could have taken also some others, which express these typical views, right? On the one hand, we have Thomas Carlyle, famous on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history. And think of what I showed you, what the museum in Marseille is doing now. The history of what man has accomplished in the world is at the bottom of history, of great men who have worked there. They were the leaders of men, the great ones, and so on. They patterned, they modeled the world we see it, right? And this is really pars pro toto. I could have given you so many other quotes. Whereas the other one by Professor Hannelore Schlaffer, who, she's a German professor, reacts to this increase of biographical studies, saying very, very flatly, biography confirms a farewell to theory. The biographer thus escapes the socio-historical, political, and politico-economic analysis on which in earlier times his awareness of method was founded. So this is a very, very strong critique for which she doesn't stand alone, saying that with biography, we really don't have any scholarly work in hand at all. I certainly don't belong to that school of Professor Schlaffer. I do think that actually biography is a serious scholarly genre that we use, not only because I'm writing one myself, but because we have learned a lot from it. And in the remainder of my talk, I want to explore this a little bit deeper. Yeah, I can keep this on so to remind you of this position. So what I've already mentioned, that the Biography, on the one hand, expands our knowledge by way of including individuals and groups, and it repositions and adjusts structures of sociocultural and socioeconomic power and relationships by making these visible in personal, individual interaction and providing, and that is very important, evidence for intellectual history, social history, or others at what is at work, what structures are at work. Now, while this is of interest in terms of, for you as doctoral students, for us as historians, to understand what we are doing when we are writing history, there is in biography something else which probably no other genre encapsulates as much. Namely, it is the integration of the category of the unexpected and unintended, of event and accident. And that is something which in most other historical writings we are not encountering in the same way, even if, and maybe we can discuss this later after my talk, when we speak of the study of revolutionary change and revolution. But before I will now explain what I mean by the category of the unexpected and unintended, let me just make, because I'm speaking here to you in Rabat, just a very few words on what about the Arabic biographical tradition, which is, as you know, as a genre, not only extremely rich and long established, both in genre and format and in knowledge production, but probably really overtakes European writings in this sense by far. It not only is rich and exists in large number, but it is actually, and this is very important, it's a central genre of Arab Islamic scholarship. Whether we speak of the Tarajim, of whether the life of the Prophet and his companions, the Tabaqat literature, Sufi self-unveiling writings, whatever you have, prosopography and other forms of biographical work. Tabaqat reflects the idea that rank attributed to a group of characters who have played a role in history in one capacity or the other, classed according to criteria determined by religious, cultural, scientific, or artistic order, etc. For the biographical literature, it is the book of classes of characters arranged by categories organized into generations. The principal idea here is of equivalence in terms of people, time, and generation. So this genre in Arabic, in the classical tradition, actually emphasizes affinity, similarity, and belonging to a group or a class. Today we may call it identity, but that is certainly not what the classical Arab biographers had in mind, with the added value that identity has. And the genre of the Sira, on the opposite to Tabaqat, emphasizes the exemplary, the individuality of a life. So we see that we have in the traditional foundations, in a very, very short campus here, already everything that we are discussing here as well with regard to biography and historiography. So then the question is biography possible in light of what we've seen so far? Can one write the life of another person that would be more than fiction and would fulfill scholarly principles and would be faithful to claims of truth? These questions point to heuristic as well as methodological questions. Does biographical writing avoid stringent methodology and theory, or is it actually on the contrary, a testing ground for it? Namely, through biography, being able to verify some of our sociological, political, religious assumptions we hold. As so often, in my view, the answer lies in the continuum between the two extremes. It goes without saying that we are excluding here biographies that are deliberately written as easy entertainment, that do not claim to be authoritative and authorized, or indeed they actually may be authorized but not true. That does not mean that they are not worthy to be called biography, but their authority and credibility rest on other than scholarly factors. But then there are also different national styles and expectations and conventions. And this kind of heuristic ambiguity between social norm and personal experience, between the telos of a life predetermined by class, religion, geography, or gender, remember the film and the book I was indicating, showing you in the beginning, and of accident and event, is why the biography enjoys a troublesome standing, less so in the Anglo-American academic world, but certainly in France and in Germany, and I believe in the Arab world too. Is a biography a scholarly work? In many countries, you would not get a PhD for writing a biography. I actually don't know. Maybe in America you get. But of course, a doctoral thesis may very heavily rely and consist of biographical data. But you would never submit a biography, maybe here, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, on writing a biography as a qualification work. So then I will cut this little bit through because I think I made my point. Let me then add what I believe to be really at the fascination for biography, why we like to read it. I hope you share that you like to read this, and also why we like to produce this. So is it then so easy? I mean, having said what I said about finding a balance between structure and the individual, the very intimate data that we have, data that is not translated into texts, but that would come from interviews or all kinds of interventions. Hence, this is why I started with the film. Is it really so easy to come to writing a biography, and where are the limits? Very briefly, because you had, I heard, deep classes already this morning and yesterday about how do we ascertain the value of data. One of the very first modern European autobiographies was written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Some of you may have read it or at least heard about it, Les Confessions, which was published in 1790 and which is today hailed both in Arabic scholarship as well as in European scholarship as the first true autobiography, right, that we have in European writing. And as famously Rousseau stated in the preamble to his text, which he did not want to be published before his death, he said that one has to be very cautious about the inherent possibilities of knowledge of oneself and of people. He provocatively argued that one knows only oneself. I quote him, "No one can write a man's life but himself," end of quote. He thus justified his own enterprise of self-revelation, arguing that one misinterprets others constantly because one judges them in light of their own experience. Therefore, the autobiography, I'm aware that this is not biography, but the autobiography provides a piece of reliable evidence, a claim to which very soon the man who gave him safe haven when Rousseau had to flee from the continent to England, the Scottish philosopher David Hume countered the argument and said that nobody knows themselves, nobody knew themselves less well than he did. You cannot know yourself, right? And it is, again, this position, this tension between these two extreme positions that very much informs our scholarship today when we're writing biographies, and that informed the biographical term. And I would say that it's, without exaggerating, that we haven't really moved far beyond Hume and Rousseau, but where we have moved beyond them is that we have refined our tools to question the capacity of self-knowledge and knowledge of the other, of insight and limits, and how to get at this. This is, after all, the quest of you as doctoral students and of us, the scholars. So it is then precisely there that it is about deep insight that we need to grasp. And the genre biography may seem to be so easy, right? If you look at classical Arabic dictionaries Fulan is born here, then he went there. You gave a very brief account of what I did. So we have all these data available, especially now in the media. But then there remains something which is not captured in this kind of data. And this is the fascination with things that a scholar has called the cunning of uncertainty. For there are things that are known, there are things unknown, and there are unknown unknowns, right? Things you don't even know that we don't know them. I'm borrowing here the concept of the historian of science Helga Nowotny in her book, The Cunning of Uncertainty, and where she defines this as a subversive force of reasoning and action. While for Helga Nowotny, she calls for embracing a condition which is again not such a new thing. The Greeks called it the metis, combining knowing and crafting in the production of knowledge. It is counterintuitive, and as experience has taught us, that it is achieved, this uncertainty, by differing in what you do substantially from what had been intended in your life. And this is why I started with the retour à Reims. Precondition should have been for him the precondition that he will remain a working class boy. But things happened in his life, and he turned out to be one of the leading sociologists in Paris who can reflect about his own condition. That this is possible is not that he got a gift from heaven or some inert super quality, but it is indeed special constellations, conditions, cunning of uncertainty that worked here. So I see that, because we had a little bit of the problem with the technology, that I should start to wrap up. Let me summarize very briefly and then just jump to my very last example. How in contemporary Arab scholarship, where the biographical turn also took place, how this is played out. As I mentioned before, Arabic scholarship is very rich in biographical data, probably much richer than, at least to my knowledge, any of our European counterparts. So with the biographical turn that occurred in the 1980s in the West, let's say in Western scholarship, there were very quickly not only echoes in Arabic scholarship, but it came also from inside scholars who work on Arab biography, medieval, pre-modern, and modern. Scholars like Fadwa Malti-Douglas or Hilary Kilpatrick were among the first to look afresh at the biographical dictionaries that we have and to question and saying that instead of looking at the biographical material that we have in Arabic dictionaries as providing only external data, dates, movements, contacts, today we would call this network science, right? Network science does exactly this, what dictionaries, biographical dictionaries do. Who was where, when, and if you map this, you have a space of influence. Scholars have taken or started to take this more seriously and looked at composition. How are parts of the composition put together in order to portray a certain kind of personality, to go beyond the surface of external description of events that do not allow us, which is our drive today, as I told you, to understand the authentic person, what is really his or her motives or motivation, to understand those. So these were the very first ones by looking into composition, arrangement, and reading them against the grain. And others followed suit. And as I don't know if any of you works with this material today, you will find that in the last 20, 30 years, the production of biographical material in Arabic scholarship has increased and improved tremendously. I then say, so why the turn? I mean, we learn from the history of science that whenever somebody calls for a turn or said that a turn occurred, that very term requires deconstruction itself. So did it really do anything? So a turn, it's very easily, you know, we have all kinds of turns, but in itself, right, this requests us to ask what is the relevance and the usefulness of proclaiming this. So unfortunately time is short. In preparation for my talk today, I looked briefly at the Frankfurt Book Fair. This is the largest book fair in the world, as you may know. What kinds of books are published? And what is published is biographies. Biographies of love affairs, biographies of all kinds of books of war crimes, of course, biographies of cities. And Rabat and the Moroccan cities are, of course, also subject to quite a number of these works. But there is also indeed a return of the great man. One of the most amazing books that came out now and that is celebrated is the one by the British historian. Maybe I can quickly get there. By the British historian Ian Kershaw, who comes back to something from where we started. He is not really suspect to be an open communist or Marxist, but he starts also his book with reference to the famous saying, right, which is a turning of the great man motif that we just heard before. Men make their own history, but not as they please, in conditions of their own choosing, but rather under those directly encountered, given, and inherited. And what he does is he calls his book Personality and Power, Builders and Destroyers of Modern Europe, which has 12 biographies. One is a woman. You would not believe who that is, Margaret Thatcher. I don't know how she gets into the rank of being among the 12. The rest are, of course, male biographies, and it's dedicated to charismatic men, leaders and dictators of the 20th century. And it is not a coincidence that somebody, Ian Kershaw, who is being the biographer of the Hitler, two-volume Hitler biography of Nazi Germany, and this, are returning to this model of great men. We can discuss this in the minutes that we have to this afternoon. How come that we have this return to portraying, while we have on the one hand this retour à Reims as a model of depicting city class, working class women, what have you, but at the same time the emergence, remember Abdul Qadir, the exhibition that we see, and books like this depicting the life of great men. The one great man I don't want, then I finish, want to show you is, of course, a biography that has moved many readers, not only in the Arab world, but also we can say he is indeed one of, I mean, it has a legendary status, the author, but also this book, Out of Place, in which he states, you can read it yourself, but I'm still reading it, that skepticism too is one of the themes I particularly want to hold on to. With so many dissonances in my life, I have learned actually to prefer not being quite right and out of place. This is written, you know, by the intellectual historian whose life is marked by dislocation, displacement, and struggle for place, out of place, and combine this with a statement he made a little bit earlier in response to what was witnessed in Beirut, where he said in the 80s and during the Civil War, "For where no straight line leads from home to birthplace, to school, to maturity, all events are accidents. All progress is a digression, all residence is exile." Right? You have again, I mean, this is beautiful language. It's painful to read because this is, again, this is not fiction, but this is biography. And this is biography of a person, the young man you see there, but it's again example for so many others. And it is then our task as biographer, nevertheless, despite all this the cunning of uncertainty, and the ambiguities that are there to make sense of this. And I thank you for your attention.
شكرا جزيلا للأستاذة نادية البغدادي على هذه المحاضرة القيمة. أستاذة نادية البغدادي كدارسة وباحثة في السير، موضوع السير الذاتية أو البيوغرافيا بشكل عام، ركزت على أهمية هذا النوع من الدراسات التي تركز إذن على البيوغرافيا بشكل خاص، أهميتها بالنسبة للدراسات التاريخية. ومن هذا المنطلق فقد تناولت في محاضراتها، وبالطبع لن أطيل، سأشير فقط باقتضاب لأهم المحاور الأساسية التي وردت في المحاضرة. فهي بعدما أبانت عن يعني نوع البيوغرافيات أو معنى ومدلول البيوغرافيا والسير الذاتية بشكل عام، حاولت أن تنتقل بعد ذلك إلى التطرق إلى البيوغرافيا وأهميتها في الدراسات والأبحاث التاريخية بشكل خاص، ونوع وقيمة وثراء المعلومات التي يمكن استخراجها والتي يمكن تحصيلها من دراسات البيوغرافيا. حاولت أن تشير إشارات بشكل مقارن ما بين كيفية البحث في البيوغرافيا في الثقافة الغربية وفي الثقافة العربية الإسلامية. بعد ذلك طبعا من خلال هذه المحاور قدمت كثير من الأمثلة، وهذه الأمثلة بالفعل أمثلة متنوعة جدا. وما في شك أن من يعني يدرس التاريخ والثقافة الإسلامية يعرف إلى أي حد أننا إزاء يعني موضوع ضخم، إشكالية ضخمة في التراث الإسلامي، لأن هذا التراث زاخر بالبيوغرافيات. فمن منطلق هناك سير المختلفة للرسول أولا، في هذا إذا ما وقفت فقط على بعض المعالم الأساسية التي ميزت يعني تاريخ البيوغرافيا في الثقافة الإسلامية. ثم كتب الطبقات المختلفة، لا شك تعرفون الطبقات الكبرى والطبقات الصغرى لابن سعد، وأنواع أخرى من هذه الكتابات، خصوصا بعد بدء ما يسمى بعصر التدوين في القرن الثالث الهجري. وبعد ذلك نجد انتشار كبير لكتابات كثيرة ومؤلفات حول ما يسمى بكتب الأنساب، وهذا يعني هناك تراث ضخم لهذا النوع من الكتابات في الثقافة الإسلامية والمغربية أيضا. ثم كتب المناقب التي تزخر هي كذلك بكثير من السير وبكثير من والطبع هنا المؤلفات كثيرة جدا. وأريد أن أعقب وأختم حتى لا أطيل، لأنني أريد أن أترك لكم الفرصة أيضا من أجل أن تطرحوا أسئلة أو تعقبوا على ما تفضلت به الأستاذة في محاضرتها، وهو مسألة التحقيق، يعني تحقيق التراث وتحقيق هذه المؤلفات وهذه المخطوطات التي تزخر بها كثير من خزانات سواء في المغرب أو خارج المغرب. قضايا التحقيق، ليديسيون كريتيك في بخصوص هذا التعامل. هذا مجال من المجالات الواسعة، قضايا تحقيق المخطوط، ويطرح إشكالات كثيرة جدا. وأتمنى أن تكونوا من خلال دراستكم وأبحاثكم وكذلك من خلال يعني الدروس التي تتلقونها في الجامعة والأبحاث التي تباشرونها، مما لا شك فيه أنكم تتطرقون إلى هذا الجانب الذي لا يخلو من أهمية بالنسبة لهذا الموضوع. طبعا أقف عند هذا الحد، لا أريد أن أطيل، في الكلمة لكم قبل كل شيء وليست لي، فأنا هنا فقط من أجل أن أقوم بتيسير التواصل بينكم وبين الأستاذة نادية البغدادي. إذن الكلمة لكم لمن يطلبها. أريد لكل من يريد أن يطرح سؤال أن يقدم نفسه.